Hi, welcome to Module 1. In this, over the next few minutes, we're going to be talking about 360 imagery and sort of the state of play where we are currently. 360 imagery has taken off, largely led and influenced by us all being able to use Google Street View, the ability to get down at street level, sweep 360 to see what the property looks like, what the roads are like, what a park looks like. There are two or three big issues with Google Street View, though, that we probably need to reflect on. First off, in some countries, Google Street View isn't even allowed, largely because of concerns about privacy and also about aggregation of information from the people who use it. So you do get companies like Germany, Denmark, and Greece who have their own version of Google Street View. But Google Street View is limited in a number of ways. First off, it's limited by the vehicles. It's difficult to get Google Street View of footpaths, public spaces. Unless you can get a vehicle or a car there, there's not really that much coverage. So there's lots of infill and other requirements. Typical example would be one of the jobs I've just been working on is an accessibility to show people with disabilities a university campus. You can't take a car there, so you can't use Google Street View. So your own personal idea of your own personal Google Street Map is a great solution. But then the other part of it is 360 tours inside. Now, okay, we've seen lots of 360 tours. It's a massive part and component of real estate marketing, selling, and things like that. And we see more and more 360 tours of businesses, of restaurants, of hotel rooms, of venues coming onto the market. But we've still only touched a very small percentage of the potential applications for it. So we can capture 360 in a number of different ways and to a number of different levels of refinement. And we're going to be talking about those shortly. But at the moment what we've got is a mixture of techniques, a mixture of cameras and a mixture of software providers and platforms that we can use. Some are you take the photographs and you upload these to a service and they will do the stitching and render for you. So people like Matterport, great if you want to sell, retail spaces. But as soon as you upload, then they take over the copyright of those images because they're the ones fundamentally changing them. So there are services like that, and there's other people coming up like Giraffe and Real See, a whole series of people who are coming up with 360 applications and ways of doing it. We're going to talk more specifically about the cameras and formats later on, but the market is vast and it's increasing every day in the number of applications we can use it for. So let's have a look at just some list of applications, and these are all jobs that I've worked on in the last few years where we've applied 360 imagery to these solve particular applications or address particular applications. So number one, site documentation for architecture, engineering and construction. How do you record sites easily? Okay, well, 360 imagery cameras, whether they're a camera sat on your head or a pole or some more advanced device, allow you to produce a Google Street View on steroids tour of your building site and then just share that information. It could be used for BIM as part of the BIM as built level 3, showing what happens, and then 4, 5, 6 as well. You can use it as part of the operation handover manuals, site documentation, and it just goes over, and there's just lots and lots of applications just on site documentation. Okay, and most of you probably on this course will be working with exactly the sort of clients who need this information. Right. Then we've got the applications in the commercial side. For example, I'm trying to prove that I've actually done some work, or you want to put this into a tender document to say this is what you need to do. So, and it's a really simple way of showing what the conditions are like on site. As I say, there's a very old chestnut of a picture tells 1,000 words. It is actually true. Embedding, what we are now finding is that the companies are embedding 360 tours into their tender documentation for two reasons. One, it means that more people can actually tender and they're not limited by the distance that they've got to go to for a site visit. And the second thing is, what people are finding is that they are getting more information so they can make a more accurate bid without having to put in contingency fees for undiscovered or unknown issues. It's interesting, some of the companies, and there's one water utility company who found this, can't tell you who they are, but what they found is by embedding 360 tours into the commercial documentation at tender stage 1, it decreases the cost of tendering by about 25%. But also, they found that it reduces the final cost of the tenders in by about 15%. Because as they say, there's sort of two types of companies. There are those who want as much information as possible so they can put in an accurate price. But then there's other companies who don't necessarily want that information because they are expecting, traditionally, to make most of their profit on the variations in contract they weren't aware of. By putting 360 imagery of the site, its conditions, access points, loading places, traffic, dilapidation surveys of the environment around, in the tender document, then they've got all the information, and then there's a record of what has actually happened since they started work and when they handed it over. So it's becoming a very important tool in commercial management of projects. Now, this could be anything from a new build to dilapidation to brownfield, remedial work, maintenance work, a whole slew of different things. And it's a very simple way to say, well, this is what it was like before and this is what it was like after. Because 360 gives you 100% coverage. It's not like you're taking photographs and you missed that particular paving slab or that window had a crack in it or whatever it might be. So it shows a verification of works completed and the condition before and after. Massive application that could save thousands and thousands of pounds for both procurement and the contractor. Okay, moving on. We'll move into a slightly different field, not related directly to the AC sector, but increasingly 360 imagery, well, not increasingly, for the last 20 years, 360 imagery has been used quite extensively in crash and crime scene forensics. I have a complete course about that, but you can imagine if you've got to document a crime scene, 360 imagery is a really easy way to collate information and show stuff. And as you'll see, there's some really interesting platforms which allow you to add evidence, add documentation to the site. So you produce a sort of like a knowledge map of the scene. We're going to talk more about some of these specific applications as we go through. Okay, let's talk about what this course is really about though, which is actually using 360 imagery for inspection, whether that's structural, dilapidation, condition. But inspection covers a whole gamut of different applications. It could be inspection of streams or environment. It could be inspection of a building or a structure, a tunnel, a bridge, a wall, a facade. The list just goes on and on and on. Because going back to our first point in site documentation, what we can see is we can see trends, we can see changes, and that's what inspection is all about. Now we're going to be focusing on that because obviously if we're doing inspection and structural work, then we need the best detail we possibly can, but also we're going to have to deal with lots of different lighting conditions, and that is really one of the focuses of the course, is how do we cope with different light? How do we cope with dark shadows or tunnels or spaces with limited access? Darkness is one thing, but as you'll find out, that's quite straightforward to cover and to solve. The real problem we have is sunshine and brightness. And the course is going to be focusing a lot on what we call the dynamic range of a scene. Okay, now adding on to inspection, of course, inspection could be for structural and stuff, but it could also be for asset management. We've got, a company has lots of different assets, whether that's culverts or manholes or inspection covers or substations or telecom towers. The list just goes on and on. But recording the condition and looking at how that works is really critical to asset management. Asset management is really about how long is that asset going to last before we have to replace it. It's in a really simplified way. In maintenance, it's what we call MTB, mean time between failure. How long is it going to last before we have to replace it? Now, we need to have this information because without that information, how can we plan budgets? How do we know how much paint we're going to need to replace that wall, or potholes to refill, or cracks in buildings, or whatever it might be? The remediation, the maintenance budget, we cannot come up with a budget until we know what we've got. So asset management, or the inspection of assets, is hugely important. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with 360 imagery, because you're not just taking a photograph of just a cabinet or a fire extinguisher, you're showing it in its context too. Okay. Now, we've also got applications for 360. You see this all the time. I mean, most of us have heard of Matterport or Giraffe and have seen the Matterport experience. And what we're going to be doing is going beyond Matterport. For marketing purposes, it can be really impressive. For retail, selling your retail space, your real estate space. That could be commercial, could be retail, residential. It can also be used to show venues, wedding venues, museums, just anything, restaurants, a hotel room, or just a vast around it too. But all of these can be shown really easily using 360 imagery, producing virtual tours or single images. And the marketing aspect of 360 is where most of the focus has been. It's where Matterport positioned themselves, and RealC, Matterport's Chinese equivalent, people like Giraffe. There's a list, and we'll talk more about their cameras and systems later on. But for marketing purposes, 360 is a really simple way to give people an idea of the place they're going to visit. If you've got an Airbnb, having a 360 tour increases the chances that you are going to secure an order or book that place. It's just the idea of being able to convey things in a simple way. And if people can use Google Street View, they can use these 360 tours. And there's a massive market for that. The problem has always been getting the consistency of the image, because when we come into marketing and all the other things, there are certain limitations on 360 imagery which we're going to be fundamentally addressing. The idea of dynamic range. Sunshine comes into something and it can spoil the image completely, so the high quality image is critical. Okay, let's move on to some more mundane applications maybe. So, how can other applications use it, or other users? Well, let's pick a few, like, for example, health and safety. So the ability to evaluate, do risk assessments, and then to share that for inductions, familiarization, is a great way for people to engage and learn and experience things before they go to site, to plan, to anticipate the risks, to evaluate what the risks might be. And a 360 tour or 360 image of a particular site is easily shared, not just with the health and safety people, but with the contractors, your suppliers, other stakeholders, other colleagues in your industry, in your organisation, people you're going to work with and collaborate. So risk management, things like hazardous substances as well, mapping those. Where are they? To familiarise yourself with them. So it's a great way for health and safety people to be able to visit places remotely and train people. If I'm going to work in a nuclear power plant outage, for example, I can actually, before we get on site or go through the barriers, we can share the environment and share the risks and train people up. And simply we can do this in on a screen, or we can use VR or even AR. And we'll be talking about VR applications in the final week, when we're talking about some real interesting ways that we can use and share this information in different ways. Which leads us on to another thing, which is actually using 360 imagery in health and safety, but also as a training and development medium. We can show people where to go, we can show people where the kit is, we can show how you do certain things, where the exit routes are, where the emergency response places might be. So because we can create a very simple 3D tour, we can familiarise people with things, tasks, responsibilities, and all sorts of things. So as a medium for learning and development platforms, 360 imagery can be really powerful and engaging. One of my favourite things I do when we won a small award for this is actually to use this for what we call knowledge mapping. What's that mean? Well, 80% of everything you learn from a story. And also in an organisation, 80% of what knowledge is held is not written down. It's not what we call explicit information. It's what we call tacit information or tacit knowledge. It's the stuff that you don't write down, like who's got the car keys, who's the best person to go and get this, who's got experience in, who's done this job before. So one of the things we've used it for in the nuclear industry is for tacit knowledge mapping. Because in this particular case, one of the criticalities, and the same with lots of heavy industries, is the age demographic means that an awful lot of expertise is being lost through retirement. Yes, you're always going to lose people to move to another company, but retirement loss is a massive criticality identified in the nuclear industry. And what we did there was we produced a Google Street View tour, and then one of the guys who was retiring, Carl, just walked around and added documents, added the stories about his experience of 30 years of working in his nuclear plant. This is what we did here. And it's this outage. This is, don't use this crane here because we did down and the boom isn't, you can't do this sort of stuff. This is what we can do. Oh, here's the right document. And adding all this anecdotal, tacit experience knowledge as a map to a 360 tour of the facility. So in that case, it's been it's massive. It paid for itself in the first couple of days of an outage. So there's lots of interesting ways of using 360 to manage knowledge in an organisation and then to share it, both to harvest it and then to share it. Big market, and we'll talk about that particular application in module 5 because I think it's really interesting. Come back to the real estate marketing dilapidation stuff, so the Matterport, Real C, Giraffe type approach. Very usable, short-term stuff. If I want to use it for long-term asset management, probably not the best solution. But again, we'll talk about this in, I think, the third or fourth week of the course, where we're talking about platforms and shareability. Talking about real estate, apart and commercial stuff, of course, the other thing that follows on with this is facilities management. How do you manage these commercial properties, factories and things? Facilities management and using 360 is a great way to show people what they need to do, record change, show people where different things are, etc. And to record and alongside asset management, the two are dovetailed together. And 360 is a really simple way of sharing that knowledge. And then let's talk about another aspect which comes up, because there's quite a few of these, isn't there? Okay, let's talk about the insurance market. So the insurance market, the ability to reduce building costs, to assess damage, to measure the quality of remedial work is huge. And 360 imagery provides an easy solution for insurance assessors, contractors, suppliers to manage the damage and to look at the workflow and then record the changes, help get price estimations going back to our site documentation. How much is it going to cost? Well, 360 image is a great way of sharing this amongst a lot of people so they can come back with their prices and ask more intelligent questions. Then there's one specific area to do with insurance, which is my particular thing at the moment, which is to do with heritage. This has come because of the fire at Notre Dame and the Glasgow School of Art, where there wasn't that much information of this heritage property there before before the damage was done. If they had that, then the restoration costs would be hugely reduced if they knew and had records. So there's a certain market for looking at protection of property where 360 imagery is a great quick way, and depending on the camera you use and the definition you can gather and the quality of the image, which is what we're going to be showing you how to achieve, is a huge way of mitigating costs and guaranteeing the reproducibility of things. In this case, it's about not just geometry, but because we could do that with LiDAR, of course, but it's about colour. We need to know the exact colour of paint. We need to know all those sort of things. Okay, so there's another aspect. And just to touch on one more in this section, mapping, one of the big projects I've been working on for the last year is using 360 to map accessibility for people with disabilities. How do they get from the railway station to the bus station or the library and avoid obstacles depending on their level of disability? And it's not just about people who are handicapped or have disabilities. Of course, with an ageing population, mobility is a huge issue for an awful lot of people. And this applies for accessibility in heritage. How do you get up that clock tower, church tower, to see the view or the thing it's known for if you're not there? How do you share that experience? And the practical problems of how do people navigate safe routes depending from A to B? Well, 360 Tour, or having a Google Street View on steroids that is focused on the limitations and where people can move, that are focused on routes down pavements, across university campuses, into public transportation networks. There's a whole slew of different things which we could be using it for. So that's just one. But then we go on to another big bunch of stuff, which is really exciting. This is to do with, we're actually using 360 imagery, but more for visualization routes. That could be anything from point cloud colorization, so we can illuminate and colorize things and get consistent lighting in dark areas or brightly lit areas or external lit areas. Everybody focuses on shadows and nothing, but if you're trying to colorize something in the noon in New Mexico or the Middle East, and where the sun is always there, and you don't get the luxury of cloud cover to reduce your shadows, you have to be able to work with this. And then we've got the whole new thing of moving into VR content, and things like Apple Provision now are encouraging us with data capture to produce huge content. And the issue with VR is there's loads and loads of devices out there, but there's not much content. 360 imagery provides an ideal way of delivering VR content, which is engaging and huge accuracy and resolution, detail. It's amazingly capable tool, as you'll see with some of the images we're going to be talking through. Of course, then we use it in games environments and CGI and HDRI effects. So most of what I've learned about 360, I said it in the introduction, I've learned from the CGI and effects business. We're going to be talking specifically about that and how 360 imagery is a key tool in virtually every CGI and effects film produce film and even advert that you see. One of the more interesting applications of 360 comes in looking at architectural studies for visualization, using what we call sky domes, looking at for facade inspection, and also for visualization, so you can actually take a view and show the view outside the window of the surrounding environment, whether that's an urban building or the view or what it's going to look like. Because when you're trying to sell things to a client, they want to see, well, you want to give them the best experience they possibly can get. There's another interesting application that I do a fair amount of work in, what we call reflection studies. If I'm building an office block or a building or any building that's got some curtain wall cladding that's glazed or reflection, then I've got to be really careful about a number of things. Like there's a famous building that was built in London, and they produced a beautiful glass facade. It looked amazing, but the only thing you could see in it was the billboards advertising whatever it was reflect on the other side of the road. So reflection studies allow architects to visualize what the cladding and the building's going to look like in different weather conditions, different lighting, you know, whether it's raining, whether it's dark, whether the traffic light's going to colour it, whatever it might be, to simulate that. It produces like a visual digital twin to show how light reacts with that building. So you can ask the what if questions. It's a really interesting way of doing work, and we use 360 imagery for doing exactly that. Okay, so architectural visualization through 360 imagery is a huge tool that can be used in those applications. But then also we've got other things that we can use on conventional stuff. 360 for monitoring changes, deformation, because the other thing you have to remember as well is that 360 imagery can also be used for photogrammetry to produce dimensionally accurate point clouds and meshes, which you can use and you can compare sea changes and deformation. And then the other thing that comes along with the surveying industry is using it for utility surveying, for manholes, confined spaces and things like that. But also, critically, for an awful lot of survey companies, simple 360 imagery is a great way of doing QA, as a lot of people, survey companies, have found. A 360 image allows you to verify your CAD in the office, okay, to infill the stuff. And 360 imagery is a bit of a bridesmaid in the geomatics land survey industry, but it is going to be hugely important because this is a revenue stream that can be added very simply to your existing services, whether you're doing topographic surveying, utility surveys, point cloud, all sorts of issues. Adding 360 imagery or quality 360 imagery to your deliverables can be hugely beneficial. There's a couple of caveats with that. The first one is to look at the ownership of the who owns these images. Okay, so why is ownership such a big deal? It turns out it's really important. Not just in terms of protecting your copyright, but also in transactional and contractual work. Copyright of an image extends to you the second you press that shutter button. You have created that image, you own the copyright of that. Okay. Now, if I have to upload that to a processing service, then the copyright would then change because it's manifestly been changed to that service that you are owning, that you are uploading to. And this is one of the downsides. Now, this might be irrelevant for a short-term thing. Do you really want to bother about who owns the copyright of the photograph to your house that you're selling? But if you are looking at documenting intellectual property, your assets, do you really want a third party to own these images? And this is an incredibly important consideration that you have to think about when you're looking at managing images yourself, or whether you are transferring ownership to a client as a part of a transaction for being paid and commissioned to do the work. We're going to explore in this idea a lot more as we go through the course, because it can be quite important and influence the type of camera you choose, the way you process them. Obviously, in an ideal world, you want to be able to own, manage, control and share the images in any way you like, but there are certain economic benefits of being able to share that and not having to take responsibility. So there's swings and roundabouts, that's seesaw, isn't it? Okay, between the potential that you have, and a lot of the choice of method that you use, whether it's a camera, whether it's an upload stitching service, whether you stitch it yourself, is dependent on the use case and dependent on the client and what they may want to do with these images. You know, if I'm doing asset management of a railway, I might want to have those images on record for 10, 20, 30 years. I don't have to pay a monthly subscription so I can view them, do I? I want to be able to own them, put them where I want to, in my storage, on my cloud, the client's cloud, whatever it might be. And I have to have complete control over them. So that's one of the big differences is in how the 360 imagery market is arranging itself. And I don't think there's a good thing and a bad thing. There's just different ways and pros and cons. If I want a short-term 360 tour of my house and I'm going to have it for a few months and I don't want to worry about storing it and updating it, and I want some of the other value that goes with it, you know, a doll's house version that'll help me sell it, then fine. But I'm not going to have the same attitude to my nuclear power station where I've got security issues, I've got trending, I've got documentation, things change, I've got to verify stuff. Is this the right image? Have I got a newer one? Has work been done? So having traceability, findability, timelines and things like that are going to be hugely important. So the choice of method that you use, we're going to spend a bit of time on that and look at some of the alternatives in the fourth week when we're talking about sharing platforms. Okay, so that's really important because you take all these images and you should be able to control them or at least get some revenue from them. And talking about revenue, let's talk about how 360 imagery is impacting certain aspects of the geomatic industry, because I think it's really important for us to spend a bit more time on the applications and where we can enhance things. I've been in the survey industry for many years and we've supplied 2D topographs and manhole cards, and anyone in the land survey industry knows about this, property boundaries, all sorts of things. Although we rely on CAD drawings, in many cases, it's much easier to explain things if we can actually show a picture. If we say on a topo 2D survey, his vegetation, wouldn't be great if we could actually show what that vegetation is. What is it? Is it a mixture of stuff? I mean, we're not biologists, but we could figure that out. If we're doing a measured building survey, it wouldn't be great if we can not only tell you the dimensions, but show the architect, the landlord, or the property owner, or potential buyer, what the condition is, what's the condition of the material, of the fabric of the building. Yeah, and we can do this. We get lots of, you'll see on LinkedIn, lots of lovely drone photographs of buildings and roofs, but what about the inside of the building? Okay, we've got a measured dimensional survey from LiDAR, which is great, and we probably need that. But having spent a lot of time with architects, I hadn't scanned inside a building for a long time. Because I talked to one architect, one of the biggest in the UK, and I said, well, what do you do with these point clouds? And they said, we don't do very much with them, but we like the panos because we need to see the light, the colour, the condition of the building. We need to see how it interacts with the other buildings around it. We don't get that from a measured building survey and a 2D drawing or a Revit model. 360 is it's a lovely way of looking at things in context and expanding the market and your potential clients outside of a normal CAD deliverable. But let's face it, that's what we do most of the time. We deliver things to a CAD environment. But our audience for this data that we're getting could be much, much wider. So all of this leads us nicely into probably one of the biggest considerations in considering using 360. I mean, we can spend a lot of time talking about the image quality, and we can talk about a lot of time on how to share them, but one of the critical things is, we're going to be taking lots of photographs. How do we manage them all? I mean, look at this, inspections. We could be taking hundreds of photographs of all sorts of different things. But one of the critical things we need to be able to address is one of three questions. The first one we need to think about is, where was this photograph taken? I mean, where exactly on the planet? And in which particular room in the hospital or the school is this a photograph of? How do we all sort that? Based on the fact that the file we get is it's got a name, and we have to spend time managing this and populating it and putting it into different files and folders. Wouldn't it be a much easier way? Couldn't there be a much easier way of sorting all this? But it turns out that there is. The where comes down to a level of accuracy that we need to locate these things. Now, it could vary. I mean, we could get accuracy from our mobile phone. It's going to give us several meters, or what 3 words. And for certain assets like a pothole or a lamppost, we don't need, that's probably going to be good enough. But there are other aspects, like if we want to use it for photogrammetry, where we may want to use it down to centimetre level using RTK or PPK, GNSS workflows to geolocate that image. But obviously it depends on the type of location. But knowing where this was taken is absolutely vital to how we organise and manage all these. That's fine when we've got GNSS and we've got satellite it's up there, but how do we locate it inside a building? How do we say automatically, or allow it to figure out how we can say where this photograph was taken? Well, it turns out there are ways of doing this. I'm going to be spending a lot more time on this in one of the subsequent modules on geotagging internally, which is an incredibly useful, productive, efficient way of conveying information and plotting things and sharing this with clients or stakeholders. Okay, so that's the where. Where was it taken? Now we can solve that. Okay. The second one that we need to think about is when. Because when in inspection is incredibly important for us to know. When is because most of the photographs we're doing are to detect a change in the condition and the rate of change in the condition. Because only then can we make assessments about how we can how long the thing's going to last, what can we, what plan, time frame do we need to fix this, whatever it might be, how are things changing over time. So having a timeline or a chronology of all the photographs, so we can take one and then compare any changes, is absolutely critical. So chronology is important. Now, all our photographs are time stamped, but that's just the beginning, because we need to know, well, how many, there's lots of sub things inside that makes sense. How do we sort all that? And then also we may want to use it as a record. So this is the damage or the defect condition beforehand, and this is what it was like afterwards. Whether that's for commercial use, whether that's for maintenance, records, all sorts of different things. So knowing when is a critical thing. And finally, probably the one thing that's most overlooked is what. What is this a photograph of? I mean, specifically, I mean, we're given a title or it's put into a folder of maybe hundreds of photographs in a folder. But how can we organise this so we can categorise things? Like, for example, what type of asset is it? Does it have an ID number? Okay. If we're looking at defects, what category of defect is it? Is it spalling? Is it vegetation? Is it water ingress? Whatever it might be. And if we've got that, how can we then use that to collate these and find groups of similar conditions? Okay, here's a photograph of all the brickwork damage that I've got on these bridges, for example. How can we do that and figure this out? Okay, so the what becomes incredibly important. And this all comes down to a term I call findability. How do we find things based on where they were on the planet or in the building, what time, when it was done, and also what is it a photograph of? So the why, or the where, and the when, and the what are critical to all the aspects. And it's not just 360 imagery. This applies to all sorts of imagery, for photogrammetry, for just inspection imagery, just general photography. How do we find in all the file folders of images the specific example of that thing that we want to find? Well, it turns out that we can do that, and we're going to be spending that on. But just to point out one thing, if you're ever wondering about investments in this course or justifying cost of kit, some things to bear in mind. 25% of any knowledge-based company, which is any consultant engineer, construction, architect, land surveyor, their man hours, 25% of it is spent looking for information. And that information, more often than not, is absolutely critical to somebody making a timely, good decision. Without that information, people make bad decisions, which cost money. So in terms of efficiency and productivity, having a way of finding the right images that you need is incredibly important. The other point to point out is 1 in 4 of these searches fail to find what they're looking for. And this isn't just anecdotal, this is big companies like Gartner and McKinsey coming through and saying this sort of work. And the management of knowledge in an organisation is absolutely critical. But if a lot of that knowledge is tied up in images, you've got to find a way of making them searchable. Now, in Word and other documents and PDFs, you can search by text. But for images, you need to be able to search by content. There's no text in there. You can't search, show me all the photographs of X. You have to tell it. Now, one of the critical things, and one of the things we're going to be spending time on, is how do you do that? And by doing that, you open up a whole new possibility of services, revenue streams, and things that you can deliver to your clients. On top of that, and alongside that, we have the amazing impact of AI to look at content identification, to use AI to automatically detect defects, to detect features, to compare things. Now, all of that really depends on a good quality image. But what we're seeing now is the ability for findability to plug into AI advances to offer a completely different range of services. Okay, now we could do this with batches of images, but with 360 we get something else. We get the whole environment, we get 360 coverage. We don't necessarily need a 3D model or a LiDAR point cloud to navigate through our factory or our airport or railway station, pumping station, whatever it may be. We can use the virtual tour type approach and AI to start to tag things in this. And this is an incredibly exciting opportunity for us because it means it's a pretty low-tech way of adding information, knowledge and data to things. And it applies to all sorts of different things, findability. So what we can do is we can tag by geolocation, that's one. We can tag by chronology, and then we can tag by content, what is in the image. And this has applications in all sorts of things which we talk about in this wide reality, in the reality capture market. By tagging by asset type, what we call a taxonomy. And we can do what's called multiple tagging. An example of multiple tagging would be, let's say for example I buy a book and I play guitar, so I buy a book on blues guitars in New Orleans. Okay, so if I got that book and wanted to put it into my bookshelf behind me, which bookshelf do I put it in? Do I put it in guitar? Do I put it in geography? Do I put it in history? The beauty of multiple of meta tagging is I can put one copy, a virtual copy, in each of those sections. So I can have one photograph and it shows a manhole and a culvert and an inspection cover, and I can have it tagged with all those issues. It's not just a photograph of them. I don't have to have one tag per image. I can have multiple tags. And this creates a whole series of applications and possibilities for us to help in knowledge management and information management, whether that's in BIM and the whole information management lifecycle of a building, whether it's in knowledge management in an organization, or whether it's simply like a part of a contribution to a digital twin, because a digital twin really is a way of anticipating and interacting with a digital version of what is real. Now, critically, that involves being able to identify things, to change things, ask the what if questions. multiple tagging into images, either manually or automatically using machine learning and AI, gives us a whole new slew of things. But the first thing we've got to do is take a photograph of it. Okay, so I think you can see why I'm excited about the potential of 360. This isn't just about real estate. This is way beyond Matterport. This is way beyond Insta360. This is way beyond all the other things it goes. Way beyond sticking a 360 image on your surfboard or your mountain bike. There is huge potential for this as a way of sharing information. But the critical thing we're going to be able to do is start off with is actually take good quality images, because without good quality images, none of this really works. Okay, and that's what we're going to start with on the next module.